Quite obviously, as a personal trainer, and especially in social settings, I end up in conversations about people's fitness programs. And one of the questions that I get quite often, after somebody tells me what they're doing, they want to know, is this enough? And I thought, you know what? What a fantastic way to address a podcast. What is enough? Today on the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast.
Welcome to the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast
with Garrett Williamson.
Health, wellness, exercise, nutrition, and a whole lot more. Got questions? Call us and leave a message at 251-278-EDGE or message us at Personal Edge Fitness on Facebook and Instagram, at Team PE on Twitter, or personaledgefitness.com.
Met up with a client of mine, actually. We'd actually worked out that day, or worked out the day previously. I'm not sure which it was. It's an older gentleman. He's been with me quite a few years, and he was pretty excited about the exercise that we had done. He was talking about how difficult it was, and how challenging it was, and he was having coffee with a friend of his. Now, this friend I happen to know. He's not a client of mine, but nice gentleman, happens to stay fit, I would say. And when I hesitate in saying staying fit, it's what a lot of people perceived to be fit, and that is somebody that's older but thin and very somewhat active, not acting quote unquote his age. And I think you know how much I dislike that categorizing somebody. Anyway, we're sitting there talking. I was talking to this client of mine. He was sharing this with his friend, and he wanted me to tell him, we're talking about that exercise we did. Oh, that was really neat, whatever. And I started to get into that, not talking to this individual as trying to convince him to work out with me or lead him down that way. I was simply going to answer the question that my client had and really celebrate what he'd accomplished. I think he wanted to let his friend know that he'd done something kind of neat. Before I could actually answer the question or discuss the exercise that we had done, his friend quickly told me what he does on a regular basis as far as fitness is concerned. I didn't ask him, but quite often I have people tell me what they do in their fitness as they find out I'm a personal trainer. Hey, I work out at so-and-so. Or if they're eating, I usually don't eat this way. I usually eat healthier food or whatever. These kind of conversations come about quite often. And my staff, I'm sure they experience the exact same things. In fact, we've talked about it in different meetings. But before I could get into talking about that, he immediately told me what he did on a regular basis. And then he made a statement. Now, you may think that this is a question, but it's not a question. It's a statement. And the statement he made was, is that good enough? Or is that good? Actually, is what he said. Is that good? Now, the reason I say that's a statement and not a question is there's only one answer he wants to that quote-unquote question. That's why I say it's a statement. He wants me to validate it. He wants me to verify what he is doing. Wants me to let him know whether or not it's good enough, because obviously he thinks it is. Now, why do I draw such a quick conclusion to that? Well, it's simple. We were talking about an exercise that my client had done. The conversation really had absolutely nothing to do with what he was doing in his program, but he felt very compelled to let me know what he does as far as his daily exercise is concerned. Now, why would somebody bring that up? Well, obviously, maybe it's a competition between the two. Maybe there's just some feelings of possible inadequacy. Maybe he's proud and wants to show off to me. That happens a lot. And whatever reason, it made him feel better about being himself by making that statement to me. So I applaud that he did it. And I mean that very genuinely. But the reason I bring it up is that he told me that he walks every day. He told me how far he walks. He walked a long way. And he wanted me to tell him that's good enough. And that's what led me to thinking about this. And it's stuck in my mind now for a week or two. And it seems like not enough of a subject to talk about in a podcast. But I discussed it with some of my staff members. I was talking to one just a few minutes ago about this good enough concept. And obviously, I was not shocked. I was pleasantly pleased when I found out that, they had discussions like that too and found the same peculiarities with it, dealing with the idea of good enough. We started talking about, okay, what if we were to answer the question, what is good enough? And whether or not I think that, walking is good enough. And pick any exercise. It doesn't matter what it is. We started to analyze, okay, when people present that to us, do we typically see a pattern of some sort? Do we see a pattern of a certain type of exerciser that is doing, quote unquote, good enough, or want to know, has a desire to know what they are doing? Is it good enough? We came to a rather quick conclusion on that seemed to be somebody that does a cardio-based exercise program, and that's all they do is a cardio-based exercise program. And we found it interesting that they are the ones that want to know, is that good enough? Now, please keep in mind, not only am I a trainer, but I'm a multisport athlete. Now I'm racing right now in a aquathlon. I've raced in sprint triathlon. I've raced in aquabike. And I've done all three of those for Team USA on the World Championship stage and thoroughly enjoy cardiovascular exercise. And I heavily recommend it to our clients, and I will always recommend it. I think it's a fantastic benefit. And I could go on for a long time to prove to you that I'm not against cardiovascular exercise. I think it's wonderful. And I find myself when I get into these conversations defending the fact that, yes, I like cardiovascular exercise. I think it's great. But too often, that one is used as the good enough exercise. Now, I don't want to dwell on this too long, but let me tell you what I mean by that. And my feelings as far as that cardio only. Let's break into what is cardio. What is cardiovascular exercise? Someone that these individuals, and you may be one yourself, and I don't mean anything derogatory towards you, and applaud anything that you are regularly doing, that you're doing as far as fitness is concerned on a regular basis. Same thing I tell when a client comes and works out with me, we ask them in the consultation, what are you doing right now? And if it's not illegal, immoral, or fattening, the next thing we tell them is don't stop. So I'm a fan of that. I really am a fan of that. But cardiovascular exercise is what's at the heart of it. Pun intended, obviously. That's what it is. It's working your heart. It's cardio. Why do individuals have a tendency to do cardio or that as their only exercise and feel like it's good enough? Well, as far as feeling like it's good enough, I'll get to that in a minute, but why they typically do it? Typically, a runner, a walker, a cyclist on a regular basis does that as much for their head as they do for their body, and there's nothing wrong with that. You've heard me talk on many occasions about how important understanding what works for your head, how important that is. In fact, I did a podcast on making sure that exercise works for your head. Cardiovascular exercise lends itself to that. Why? Well, it lends itself to that because you typically get into a rhythm. And when you get into a rhythm, you get into a cardiovascular state, which is basically getting your heart rate into anywhere between 60 and 85%, typically with my exercisers that do cardio on a regular basis, and they do that as their quote-unquote good enough exercise. They're running right around 70 to 75%, and they stay there. So there's a rhythm to it. Not only that, at some point in time, to keep you going, your body releases endorphins, which actually makes you feel better. And it becomes almost mindless. And I mean that in a very, very, very good way. My mindless cardio happens to be swimming. And it's a place where people can think. It's a place where they can somewhat, believe it or not, relax. Their mind goes off. It's an escapism. If you don't have it, I highly recommend it. I'm a big fan of it. But I hate to start with but right now. I hate to stop that part of the conversation because that is so, having that feeling, having that rhythm, that mental break in your life is tremendous, and I highly recommend it. But as far as physical exercise, is it good enough? Well, let me ask you. Let's say you are more of a resistance fan and you happen to do one resistance exercise. Well, the next thing I would ask you is doing just push-ups. Is that good enough? What if all you did was pull-ups? Is that good enough? What if you just did ab work? Is that good enough? And so we had to kind of break that down. When I say we, I was talking to some of my staff members about this. And we were looking at, okay, we really want to answer the question, what is good enough? I happen to be talking to Lindsay Smith. She has a master's degree in exercise physiology, has a bachelor's degree in athletic training, and she happens to be one of our directors here at Personal Edge. And she has the rehab background besides just the training background. She's a cardio athlete. She's also a resistant athlete. She's a rugby player. And so she does it all. She likes to do Olympic lifting. She goes for runs on a regular basis. So she's pretty balanced as far as the different exercises. And we were talking about that. And in the conversation, it was interesting because I know what it feels like to be in her shoes. I'm actually playing the interviewer, and I'm asking her, hey, what's good enough? And she starts to go into very general, non-committal, I would say, discussion about good enough. And she's right, because good enough for who? Good enough for what? What are you after? And there's not one answer for any client or any person for that matter. By the way, if you're interested in contacting Lindsay to speak about that, you can call us at area code 251-341-0927. Also reach out to us at personaledgefitness.com. She has her bios on there, and you can contact her directly if you'd like. And you can always reach out to us through our Facebook page at Personal Edge Fitness. But Lindsay and I, I was kind of pushing. I was laughing. We were laughing as we were talking about it because she knew I was pushing to get her to give me something very specific. But of course, she's not going to because, hey, who are we talking about? So, but the first thing she went to is, okay, what works for your head? Well, I've done a podcast about that. You can go check it out. It talks about, doing something that matches your head and what you like to do, what means something to you. But we did both agree. We boiled it down to, she called it her 5 focal points, which are lunge, squat, push, pull, and core. Now, when we say that, making sure you can do those basic movements. I would think that anybody would need to be able to do those basic movements. I'll get into those basic movements in just a minute, but let me back up a little bit. In looking for the answer to good enough, I have to go farther back and look at why do we have to work out? And I say have to because you will remember a time when you didn't have to work out. As a kid, you didn't have to have a required 3 days a week at the gym working out. And the answer seems more obvious than it actually is. And the reason I say that is that, well, of course, you're kids, you're young, you're youthful, you're whatever everybody wants to attribute ability to age. And, I hate that. Well, it has nothing to do with that. It has nothing to do with time on a calendar. I know you're not surprised to hear me say that, but it doesn't. It has nothing to do with time on a calendar. Look what we were doing. Look at your activities. And if you're thinking about physical education class or gym class or whatever, oh, yeah, I went to gym most every day. Well, there you go. Well, that's the way we think now. We think now, hey, I'm going to go do my workout. It is my regimented, scheduled time. I have accountability associated with it. I go to the gym 3 days a week, 5 days a week, whatever it is. I do a workout for this long. We think that way. We force ourselves to have to think that way. But when we were kids, no, we were active all the time, even more so than we actually remember. So we didn't have a scheduled time to go and work out, a scheduled time to actually commit ourselves to being fit. And because our lifestyle changes, our lifestyle evolves, we get away from those activities. Now we have to do the forced planning of those activities. Now, why do I go back that far and bring that up? Is it just so I can talk about the fact that there's absolutely no such thing as age and we don't deteriorate because time passes on the calendar? Yes, absolutely. I want to repeat that because that is absolutely true. But it happens to be some of the components of ability, which are activity, nutrition, lifestyle, and mindset. And our lifestyle changes. So therefore, we stop doing these activities. And now we're looking for one activity that makes it good enough, that equals good enough. We just do this activity and we will be fit. Well, of course, that's not true. And the reason I say that is that you've got to get the entire body involved, just like you did when you were a kid. And that's what Lindsay was talking about when she was talking about lunge, squat, push, pull, and core. She's talking about moving all the different parts of the body. You've got muscles all over your body. There's nothing that, past 19, you don't need that muscle. It's not true. You need all muscles. So you've got to keep them all moving. You've got to keep them all functional. So if I were to answer it across the board and say for just the John Q general public, and please don't turn off the podcast after I tell you this because it really isn't the answer, though it will sound like it is. I would say, well, you need to do what is required to make sure that all of your muscles, all of your joints, all of your movements are maintained. That's what happens when time passes on a calendar and we allow our lifestyle to cut back our activity, our nutrition, and control our mindset because of it. It's because of allowing those things to happen, that evolution to take place, is why we have to even have these conversations of, am I doing enough? We never asked when we were younger about doing enough. So making sure that we are able to move all those different parts of our body and everything stays strong is what keeps us, dare I say, what we perceive to be youth or perceive to be young. And that is making sure that all those different body parts are able to move and move okay. So if we're not doing an exercise program that doesn't address all those different parts, from everything from breathing okay, in other words, having good energy level, which means good anaerobic capacity, that we mean that we're sleeping good because we have a lower resting heart rate like we did when we were heavily active in years gone by, then yeah, we have to do some cardiovascular work. If our shoulders aren't working quite like they used to, because we've allowed the activities to stop, and therefore because of our lifestyle change, and now the shoulders aren't working as good, yes, of course, we need to do exercises to work those shoulders. And I can keep going. The core doesn't change because a time passed on the calendar. It changes because we don't engage it. So your functional ability to control your own body mass, to have good control over your own body mass, is the answer to what's good enough. Making sure you're doing enough exercises to address those functional movements and energy requirements and a lower resting heart rate and what have you. Making sure you're doing those exercises, what's good enough. Now, that's a very general answer. I understand. You would much rather have, Garrett, give me the 5 exercises. Give me the 3 things that you should do. Well, that's a little more difficult. I'm going to touch on some of those, but there's not an answer for that for everybody. Why? Because that's just like asking, what's the best exercise? The answer to the what's the best exercise is the one that you do. Now, I may give you some of these exercises and say, well, this is what you should be doing. And you may actually hate them. You may hate them, completely hate them, and you have a hard time doing them. You basically have to grab yourself by the back of the head and drag yourself into a gym and actually make yourself do these things. If that's the case, I promise you it's not going to happen. Therefore, it's probably the worst exercise for you. Go back and look at what you did as a kid. You did things that were fun for you. There were things that you liked. Even when you played a sport for a long time because you were forced to play it, eventually you left that sport because it wasn't fun. You didn't like doing it. So this is why I bring up the mind so much. This is why I bring up the idea that exercise is a very personal thing. Exercise has to work for your head. That's what I mean by that. Exercise has to be something that you either don't mind, enjoy doing, or is at least offensive. Now, controlling your body mass, being able to move all the joints, maintain the strength in all the different muscles, can be achieved many ways, which is a good thing because we can kind of find your way of doing this. And then stick with me here now. I'm going somewhere with this. In finding your way to do that, that's what I'm talking about finding an exercise that works for your head. It also speaks to our mission statement. We are always sitting down in consultations with clients, telling them that, look, we want to find your way of working out. We want to find what works for you. Of course, I'm going to keep in mind that I want to make sure that I'm moving all the different joints. I want to make sure that I'm doing those functional movements, making sure that we're able to move like we were when we were very active and moving everything around like we were when we were kids. I want to make sure that's my goal, to make those things happen. But if I want them to make them happen and continue to occur, whether they're working out with me or not, then I need to make sure I help this client find their exercise path. What speaks to them? And you're not going to be successful unless you nail that down. You meet the good enough. You meet the good enough when you find that exercise program that allows you to do the activities that you want to do. And for lack of a better way of saying it, be the person you want to be. I'll give you an example. We had a client that one of the things we work on with everybody, and I will always say the most important exercise you will ever do is a squat. Why? Because you lose your legs, you lose your life. Incidence of mortality, you've heard me say this several times, incidence of mortality jump by 2/3 with the first hip fracture. Well, I want to make sure I keep those strong. Therefore, I'm going to make sure that you're going to do squats so that you can keep your legs strong and what have you. Well, this particular individual said he can't do squats. He had it in his mind because of something he learned a long time ago that he cannot do squats. Well, I'll give you a little secret. If you can't do squats, you can't sit down, because sitting down in a chair is nothing more than just a squat. That's all it is. But he was assured that he could not do a squat. So the trainer that was working with him was still challenged with, okay, how do I get this person to do a squat when he's not really doing a squat? Well, it's actually very easy for my staff to figure that out, because my staff member knew that was the goal. We need to make sure that joint's moving. We need to make sure that area is addressed. And the only way we're going to successfully do it is if we address what's going on in his head. He played golf. I know this sounds silly, but it is so incredibly important in personal training to understand such things. But we found out that one thing that he needed to do in order to play golf was to be able to pick up a golf tee and to place a golf tee. So the trainer developed It's a brilliant idea. He developed a program of learning and working on being able to pick up a golf tee and place a golf tee. And wouldn't you know, the individual, this particular client, would pick up a golf tee doing a squat. But of course, we didn't tell him he was doing squats. We were picking up a golf tee. That's what worked for his head. That was functional training that he needed in order to live his life. That made him feel better about being himself. Why? Because golf means a lot to him. It's no different than the client that signed up because she couldn't get on the floor to play with her grandchildren. That meant a lot to her. I want to work glutes. I want to work hip, medial glute. At the fact that after a simple evaluation for her, I really wanted to work some shoulders because she was going to be running into some serious potential rotator cuff problems. I can't talk to her about that, but what I could talk to her about and what we could design a program around was around being able to play with her grandson, get on the floor and play with her grandson. And we were able to design a program that met that. Now, when we're putting that together for the good enough, that's the real goal. There's your answer. That's what they wanted to attain. Now we've got to fit it into schedule. We've got to fit it into time of the day. Also, how much time they want to do that. And exercises that are least offensive to them and actually speak to them, I guess you'd say. And that became good enough. So if you're looking for the definitive answer of what's good enough, well, do you feel like you're able to do all the activities that you truly want to do? Now, it's easy for you to tell me, well, good Lord, when I was X amount of age, I used to do the trampoline for 4 hours straight, whatever. Okay, well, is that really what you want to do with your life? Is that something you really want to do? If it is, if you really have a passion for doing that, then yeah, then there's things that we need to go for and things that we need to work on. But what is it that you truly want to be able to do? That meets your good enough. Do you understand that your good enough could be running? It could be, because the fact that you're atrophying muscle throughout the body, you're atrophying your shoulders, you're atrophying your back, you're atrophying everything that you're not working on a regular basis, but that may not be important to you. I hate to say it that way, but good enough is, like Lindsay told me, it's in the eye of the beholder. Finding your good enough is yet another way that you can live your level of wellness. Thank you so much for listening.
Thanks for listening to the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast with Garrett Williamson. Subscribe now and be a part of the show by calling 251-278-EDGE or message us on Facebook and Instagram at Personal Edge Fitness or at Team PE on Twitter, and visit us at personaledgefitness.com.